For more on the bilateral ties between China and Russia, we're joined by Chen Chenchen. She's the Deputy Director of Macroeconomics and a Research Fellow with Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University of China. Chen Chen, thank you for joining us. Not for the first time, the Korean Peninsula crisis has overshadowed what was really a trade visit for President Xi Jinping to Russia. I have to ask you about your reaction to this missile test and what people where you are saying about this.
Well, I think that the missile test has been a reaction from the Korean Peninsula. I think it's actually not a surprise yet because there has been such uncertainties from the peninsula in recent years. But despite such shadow of the uncertain peninsula issue, I think the trade relationship between China and Russia is still the focal point of this visit this time.
You don't think it's been overshadowed by this? It's a dramatic escalation of this crisis. Are you saying that really for the Chinese government it's all about the trade relationship with Russia? I ask you that because the visuals are very striking. We had this very warm relationship between US President Donald Trump and Xi Jinping when he visited the US earlier this year, and now we see President Xi and Vladimir Putin lining up together asking the global community to de-escalate this crisis. Are they taking some kind of leadership on this?
I think this happened before. It's not just Russia and China. The bilateral relationship cannot solve, of course, the peninsula issue, not just for now, but also in the future. I think in the past, we've witnessed the failure of the six-party talks, but in the future, I think the three sides, not just China, Russia, but also the US, ideally, the three sides can work together to improve and de-escalate the peninsula issue.
Okay, well, trade talks seem perhaps much more straightforward compared to missile tests and so on. And one thing that always surprises me when we talk about China and Russia is the level of trade. We mentioned a moment ago bilateral trade between these two countries rising to around $80 billion this year. That's not a huge amount for two economies of that size. Why do you think there hasn't been in the past more bilateral trade between these two countries? What's stopping them?
I think the Western sanctions on Russia since 2014 has served as a strategic opportunity for the two countries to consolidate their trade relationships. Actually, what you have just said, I strongly agree, is that the trade scale is not big enough between the two economies. But there are huge potential for the two economies to work together. For example, China needs the energy resources from Russia, and Russia needs to export. I think not just the Western sanctions, but the complement of the economic structure between the two countries now serve as a strong foundation for the two economies to join hands.
And you've got two important areas. We have the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union, a sort of version of the European Union, a trade-free zone. You've also got the Belt and Road Initiative, which goes through large parts of that. Is there any indication that they're going to have to compete with each other, these two trade zones, for business?
I think the interconnectivity of the EU, the Eurasian Economic Union, and the Belt and Road Initiative, that's the focal point for now. Because for China, if you look at the EU member states, all the member states actually have bilateral ties with China under the Belt and Road Initiative. And also for Russia, we just mentioned that Russia needs to look east and seek more integration into the Asia-Pacific economy since the Western sanctions on its economy. So I think currently there's more the mutual complement. For China, it gets benefits on its cooperation with the Central Asian economies, but for Russia, it gets the benefits to look east more now.
And do you think that was maybe an unintended consequence of these Western sanctions on Russia, that, as you say, Russia's perhaps been forced to look east and China can benefit from that?
Well, I think that also boosts Russia to consider its national strategy. Actually, in the long years in the past, Russia has been to seek to more like integrate into Europe. Actually, the Western sanctions disappoints Russia a lot. But of course, on the other hand, if you look at the vigor of the Asian Pacific economy, of course, the future, the stimulus for the world's future growth, there's a consensus that that lies in the Asia Pacific. Of course, that's also another major consideration element for Russia.
And we have the BRICS summit. China is hosting the next BRICS summit, the group of so-called emerging economies. How do you think this China-Russia summit, this bilateral summit, what do you think that will do for this summit?
Well, the summit will be in September. We still have a few months. But currently there are perceptions saying that, well, besides China and India, of course, some other BRICS economies actually suffer from economic slowdown. And also the BRICS mechanism actually is not so close enough. It's relatively a loose platform. So I think the China-Russia efforts now are part of the endeavors to consolidate and expand the cooperation fields among the BRICS countries, and also to consolidate the political willingness and the consensus of interconnect more the national development strategies in the future. And also the 5 countries, they are representative of the emerging markets. They need to work together more solidly to push the global economic governance toward a more fairer and sustainable direction in the future.
Yeah, it certainly looks like China and Russia have got a head start on that BRICS summit. Chen Chenchen, many thanks indeed for joining us.